Amazing. And we are back. Thank you again for staying with us so far. This is News and Views on Salam Media. Please feel free to join the conversation. Our studio line is 011-680-0355. Our WhatsApp is 061-766-0355. Of course, you can reach us on X at Salam Media. Our Facebook is facebook.com/Salam Media. And of course, our online streaming platform is on the Salam Media website, salammedia.com/live dash listen dash live. I am your guest host, Abdullah Mwaswis, and in this segment, we're very lucky to be joined by Mohammad Marey. Mohammad is a historian and educator whose research focuses on politics and power in the medieval Islamic world. He is a teacher. He teaches world history and American history at an all-boys school in New Jersey in the United States. And I guess the first question for you before we actually go into today's topic is, how is America? We opened the show today talking about the recent ambassador who was appointed to South Africa, and it all just seems a bit mad, if I'm honest with you. Assalamu alaikum, Muhammad.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you all for having me first off, and it's good to see you again, Abdullah.
It's nice to see you too.
America is mad, right? Slowly and surely is going mad. And no one knows what to make of it. And I think that's by design. There's some critics and pundits who are talking about, like, this is the news kind of just rapidly rotating from one absurd story to the next is something that is done to kind of stun the American people into a kind of daze so that no one realizes when the cloak is being pulled over their eyes or what's going on, or can have a accurate view of global politics in the first one. And that,
thank you, Mohammad. Yeah. And so, I mean, sorry to cut you off.
No.
But I mean, based on how ridiculous things are at the moment, I think that's why we kind of chose to spend this segment actually talking about a time when things were also a bit ridiculous, which was, of course, the period just before and during kind of the early stages of the Crusades. A lot of people know this as being the period in which Salahuddin Ayyubi was very active. We all know about Jerusalem falling to the Crusaders in 1099 and being liberated 88 years later. And of course, there's a lot more for us to know about than just simply Salahuddin Ayyubi. There's a lot of lessons that we can take from this period. And so, Mohammed, I'm going to throw it to you. Tell us, what are the lessons, or rather set us some context, and then give us the lessons that we can learn from that time.
Yeah, I was going to say context is king when it comes to most things, right? I'm a history teacher. I always start, my students and my friends joke, that I start talking about events maybe 100 years before the event actually happened. To understand the Crusades, and kind of one of the biggest, what I see as one of the biggest lessons of the Crusades, and you need to understand the context for this, and that is that the Islamic world, right before the Crusades, was going through a moment of profound disunity, politically, spiritually, intellectually, right? There were a lot of ruptures within the Islamic community at every level. The biggest is that the Islamic world around like the late 900s is recovering really from the aftermath of the Abbasid revolution, which happened earlier, much earlier than this conversation actually, but had left the community, the Islamic community, with a number of significant fractures. You see the rise of what historians call the Shi'i century, as a number of Shi'i inspired powers across the Islamic world come to the front. You have the you have the Fatimids in North Africa, Ismaili branch, and even then you have the internal politics of the politics and religion, really, of the Fatimid dynasty, which sees splinter branches and splinter groups across the Islamic world. In Baghdad, you have the rise of the Buyids, who are again, a Shi'i family of viziers who come to power really as the day-to-day people, right? And their influence in Baghdad comes to the point that the Abbasid Khalifa is somewhere between prisoner and political figurehead, with no actual capacity to rule or make decisions. And between the Buyids, the Fatimids, you also have the rise of the Nizari Ismailis, more popularly known as the Assassins. Each of these movements today, we remember them as political, and we remember them as political, but in reality, they were ideological. Each group had an ideological claim to the truth, and therefore a restructuring or the proper ordering of society, politics, and the world. And each group was pushing their version of the truth into the public. And there was no coherent Sunni reaction. This is where the Seljuks come into the stage. They sweep through Anatolia, or they sweep through the further east, actually, the Islamic Central Asia. They convert to Islam, they adopt Persian culture, and they establish themselves as the political authorities in the gap that the now horribly decentralized Abbasid state leaves behind. They establish schools, and one of the key figures that emerges from these schools is Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, right, the great Islamic polymath and theologian, who argues coherently against all of these different views in defense of what would become today Sunni orthodoxy. And this fracture at every level between all of these competing states destabilizes the Islamic world, as each lower level politician is trying to secure his own future. Right? Each city functions semi-independently, as you have like minor statelets within statelets, all of which are theoretically loyal to the Abbasid Khalifa in Baghdad, but the Khalifa cannot really control the day-to-day functionings of these micro-states. And for them, for day-to-day, right, if I'm a Seljuk Emir, my biggest concern is what is going on within my tribe, the tribal politics, what is going on with the Seljuk Sultan, will I be replaced, what can I do to ensure that my domains increase, and my real enemies are those closest to me, less so this new foreign ragtag band of, we don't really know what to make of them yet, but these people, the Crusaders, right? And the first opinions of the Seljuks of the Crusaders is that they are horribly disorganized, that they are just a nuisance that can be driven off with a couple arrows, so that we can return to the more important and more pressing facts of life, or the more pressing matters, which is my war against my brother, my cousin, right? My usurpation of the Sultan, my attempt to annex this city next door, because that's what really matters at the end of the day. The Seljuks very horribly misjudged the Crusades, and this was because the first crusading armies to reach Anatolia and the Middle East were actually ragtag bands of peasants who had gotten caught up in the fervor of the Crusades, because on the European side of things, this is a new wave of religious fervor and a kind of restructuring of what it means to be good and godly in this ever-changing world. Because
Muhammad, if I can just, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
We do have to take a short break for ads, but I would really be happy if you stick with us for a few minutes. And after the break, we'll talk a little bit more about who the Crusaders were, and we'll go a little bit more into that side of the story. Thank you, Muhammad. So we'll be back with you after this short break.
More than 800 million people around the world
72121 Murchison Spice.
Salam Media, your spiritual companion this Ramadan.
All right, and we are back after the break. We are still joined by our special guest, Mohammad Marey, joining us from New Jersey in the United States. And I should actually mention, Mohammad, we're very grateful to have you, especially because, as I understand it, it's like 2:30 in the morning over there. And so, yeah, Jazakallah khair for joining us here in our humane hours here in Johannesburg. Anyhow, Mohammed, where we left off, you were telling us about the Crusaders and who they were, and so I'll let you take it from there. And then after that, if you can kind of come to what are kind of like the first things that you would want us to know about the story of Salahuddin when he enters.
Sounds good. So yeah, as I was saying, the Crusaders were this kind of multi-tiered reaction to a number of different things. You have internal religious shifts. You have internal economic pressures. As you remember, feudal Europe has little room for upward mobility, particularly for like noble sons who are trained in military ways but have no room to kind of expand. Europe is very landlocked, right? There's not a lot of space to grow out. So you have the political, the religious, the economic, and all of this pressure needs to go outwards, and it goes out in two directions. The first is south towards Spain. So Spain becomes the breeding ground and the kind of testing ground of what would become the Crusades, which is an interesting thing to explore another time, inshallah. And then westward and eastward, towards the Byzantine Empire, responding to the threat of the Seljuk Turks. So they steamroll their way down south because there is no coherent, unified Islamic response to the Crusades. No one wants to sacrifice their position and their power. No one wants to risk it all. The Crusaders take Jerusalem, hold it for 88 years. And then the process of bringing it back is really a process of undoing everything that I mentioned in the beginning, undoing the intellectual and spiritual malaise of the Islamic world, focusing a lot more on purification of the self. This is when a lot of these, what are today like household books of Ibn Qayyim and Ibn Qudama on prayer and self not actualization, but like as purifying the self and prayer and all of this are actually written in this time period of a Sunni revival across all the spectrums, political, religious, ideological. And so what happens is this mass movement. The people are the first to be fed up with the presence of the Crusaders, and they do what the political elite won't. They rally around their scholars. One example is Ibn Khashab in Aleppo, where he leads a popular resistance against the Crusaders. And then you have the gradual development, or the gradual maturing, rather, of this Sunni revival, and you see this with the Zengids. The Zengids are a family of Turkic warlords. They first rise to prominence in Iraq, in Mosul, as the Atabegs, or like the military leaders. And in response to repeated calls from Aleppo and Damascus for aid, the Atabeg of Mosul, Ahmad ad-Din Zengi, runs with an army to save Aleppo from another threat of the Crusaders. And this union of Aleppo and Damascus is the key, because from there the Zengids develop. Ahmad ad-Din Zengi himself is not a pious man, right? The history books are not, or what we know of his motives, right? He's not motivated by religion or jihad or any kind of like pan-Islamic unity of sorts. He's a thug, right? And he does what he does best. He fights. Except he knows one thing, that the Crusaders are the real enemy. They're the ones who should be fought, rather than this unending civil war. And he fights the Crusaders, and the people agree. They're like, we will take any baggage you have, so long as you agree with us on this basic principle. The Crusader presence is not to be accepted, and we should fight as much as we can against them. His son, Nuruddin, kind of brings this up a notch. He adds the element of piety. The Zengid state matures. They participate in this Seljuk revival of the of Sunnism, right? They expand the schools and hospitals and madrasas, and they patronize or they are patrons of scholars and sheikhs and imams and Sufi lodges across their holdings in Iraq and Syria. And along the way, they make an alliance with a Kurdish man who saved Imad ad-Din, who then in turn needs to be saved by Imad ad-Din, and his young son Yusuf is raised with the Zengids, and when he comes of age, they send him into the military, right, as most of them do. These are noblemen, this is what they train for, and he goes off on an escapade to Egypt, because Egypt now, once Jerusalem is controlled, or is under Crusader control, and you have maintenance, you have power through the Mediterranean coast, you can be resupplied through the Mediterranean Sea. Your biggest weakness is your left flank, the threat of a land army crossing in from Egypt. And so the Crusaders are racing to take control of Egypt, which means that the Zengids have to get there first. They send... Right.
And Mohammad, I'm really sorry to interrupt you again, but I think that's a great note to kind of end on for now, because inshallah we'll have you on again to kind of pick it up from there and go directly into the process that then leads to taking back Jerusalem, inshallah. So thank you very much for joining us, especially at this inhumane hour at your end. Inshallah, Allah will accept your efforts both in educating the people here in South Africa and of course in your fasts this Ramadan.
Ameen, inshallah.
And so just to thank you and to remind everyone, Muhammad is a historian and educator. His research focuses on politics and power in the medieval Islamic world. He is a history teacher at an all-boys school in New Jersey in the United States. And so with that, we will go to another break. We will join you very shortly afterwards to talk about cultural resistance in Palestine.